Okay, let's unpack this. Today, we are doing a really deep dive, maybe one of the deepest yet. We're looking at something that could fundamentally rewrite, well, everything we think we know about human history.
That's right. We've got this incredible collection of ancient sources in front of us. You mentioned them. Sumerian king lists, Babylonian texts, Genesis, Jasher, even Vedic and Mayan chronologies.
And our mission today, for you listening, is to synthesize all of this. We want to lay out the true, corrected history and timeline of the Anunnaki, or the Anunna, as some sources call them.
Yeah, and it's a critical mission because, honestly, we have to cut through decades of misinformation right from the start, the biggest one. This idea, popularized mainly by Zechariah Sitchin, of the Anunnaki having these ridiculously long lifespans, ruling for hundreds of thousands of years.
Right, the whole ancient astronaut theory based on these massive timescales.
Exactly. But the sources, when you look closely at the language, at the calendrical systems they actually use, they tell a very different story. That huge timeline, it seems to boil down to a single, pretty catastrophic mistranslation.
And that mistranslation hangs on just one word, doesn't it? The Sumerian word, Shar.
That's the one. Sitchin and others took Shar to mean a year, specifically 3,600 Earth years. But we're going to show, using the math embedded in these ancient calendar systems, that Shar wasn't a year at all. It meant a rotation, a turning, basically a day.
A day. Okay, so if a Shar is a day, not 3,600 years, wow, that changes everything.
It collapses the entire timeline, those hundreds of thousands of years. They shrink down into a remarkably precise, structured period. We're talking about the entire recorded history of the Anunnaki, from when they first show up in the records to the Great Flood, fitting into roughly 12 centuries, just 1,200 years.
12 centuries, that's manageable. That makes them feel less like, mythological space gods and more like, well, what do the sources say they were?
Exactly what the sources describe. Technologically advanced humans, they were described consistently as extremely pale, often bearded Caucasians. They came from a different biosphere, yes, with advanced tech, likely from a pre-atomic society that faced some kind of catastrophe.
So not little green men, not reptiles, humans, advanced humans who arrived here.
Precisely. And they were seen as gods, or shining ones, by the people already here on Earth. The texts describe the indigenous populations as short, dark-skinned, black-headed people. The Sumerians actually called themselves the black-headed people, the Adamu.
And this creates an immediate conflict, right? The advanced, pale newcomers versus the indigenous, dark-skinned inhabitants.
That's the core conflict that runs through this entire corrected chronology, which spans in total 7,344 years. It's a story of interaction, conflict, genetic manipulation, and repeated cycles of destruction and reset.
Okay, so let's map this out for everyone listening. We're going to trace this 7,344-year timeline, starting from, what, the initial Simulacrum War?
We'll start even a bit before that, with the Nemesis Cataclysm in 5239 BC. Then we'll follow these structured 600-year cycles called the Nur. We'll see the arrival of key figures like Enki, who you might know as the biblical Enoch. We'll track the rise and dramatic fall of the Nephilim dynasty, the giants or mighty men in Genesis. We'll look at these repeated global resets caused by something called the Phoenix phenomena.
A phoenix, right, that sounds ominous.
It is. And crucially, this timeline, derived from these ancient texts, seems to make a startlingly precise prediction about our near future. We're talking about dates like 2040 and 2046.
Wow, okay. So this isn't just ancient history, it has modern implications.
Very much so. And the key thing to grasp as we go through this is the structure. We're pulling data from all those sources: Sumerian, Babylonian, Akkadian, Genesis, Jasher, Mayan, Vedic, Chinese, the patterns that emerge, the repetition of cycles, the mathematical precision. It's almost uncanny.
It suggests something beyond just random historical events.
It strongly suggests, according to these sources, that we might be living within an artificial controlled reality, a kind of simulation or construct that operates on predictable loops designed to manage and maybe even limit human civilization.
Okay, a constructed reality. That's a huge concept. Let's dive into the evidence. All right, Chapter 1. Setting the stage. If we're correcting the timeline, we need a starting point. You mentioned 5239 BC.
Yes, precisely 5239 BC. The sources pinpoint this as the date of the Nemesis Cataclysm. This isn't just year zero for the Anunnaki story. It's the starting gun for this entire 7,344-year timeline.
7,344 years. That number seems specific. Why that duration?
It's incredibly specific, and it's structured. It's a sum of 3 distinct periods, each lasting exactly 2,448 years.
3 times 2,448 equals 7,344. Okay. Why 2,448? Does that number mean something?
It absolutely does. You have to remember, we're piecing this together from multiple cultures. In ancient Egyptian hieroglyphs, the number 2,448 literally represents cataclysm.
Wow, so the entire 7,344-year structure is built on 3 cycles of cataclysm.
That's what the deep structure suggests. It's like the system is engineered in these phases, punctuated by major destruction events leading up to a final prophecy date, which the timeline projects to 2106 AD.
2106 AD. Okay, we'll get there. But the Anunnaki themselves, they structured their own history around these cycles.
They did. They used a unit called the Nur. It represents a 600-year period. This wasn't just a random number. It seems to mark significant turning points.
A 600-year cycle. What kind of turning points?
The sources, including later ones like Josephus, who referenced Sumerian material, connect the Nur to remarkable revolutions in human thought, particularly in theology and philosophy. It's like every 600 years there was a scheduled major shift, a kind of cultural or spiritual reset programmed into the system. The Babylonians later called it the Naros.
Okay, so 5239 BC is the start. What led up to that? Was there a prehistory?
Oh yes, a dramatic one. The sources describe the Anunnaki or the Anunna as originally being part of a different society, serving something called the Godhead, but a faction rebelled. And this wasn't a small disagreement, it was a massive war.
A war in heaven. Or somewhere else.
Somewhere else, presumably their original system. The descriptions suggest a conflict involving advanced, possibly pre-atomic, weaponry. It was devastating. It apparently shattered their home system, left scars on our own moon that are still visible, and crucially, knocked Earth itself out of its original stable orbit.
Knocked Earth out of orbit.
That's the narrative. This rebellious faction, the Anunna, were then cast down, condemned to rule in this damaged system for a limited time. One source mentions a period not exceeding 50 shards. If a shard is 120 years, that's about 6,000 years, roughly aligning with the total timeline.
And the immediate consequence for Earth being locked out of orbit.
It froze. The sources suggest Earth entered a long, highly elliptical orbit far from its energy source, causing a deep freeze until it eventually settled into its current path much later. This sets the stage for that first 600-year Nur cycle within our main timeline.
Okay, so 5239 BC, the Nemesis cataclysm happens, Earth is displaced. Fast forward 600 years, the first Nur cycle completes. That brings us to 4639 BC. What happens then?
This is a huge turning point. According to the texts, around 46 and 89 BC, the Anunnaki leadership made a horrifying discovery about their new home.
Which was?
They weren't just refugees on a damaged planet, they were prisoners. They realized they were trapped inside some kind of controlled environment. The texts use terms like simulacrum or holography.
A simulation, like a Matrix-type situation.
The language points to something like that. Imagine being a technologically advanced race escaping a war, only to find out your entire reality is a controlled cage, a dungeon.
That discovery must have caused absolute chaos among them.
It did. The sources say it led to a massive internal rift, a civil war that broke out within their system, the Daystar system they were now inhabiting. Worlds fighting worlds.
And this internal war coincided with an even bigger cosmic event.
Yes. During or shortly after this civil war, their local star, the Daystar, the one Earth was associated with after the initial displacement, actually burned out. It collapsed.
Their sun died. So what happened to Earth then?
Earth became a rogue planet again. It was essentially untethered, reeling through darkness for 270 years.
270 years.
Just drifting.
Drifting. Until finally, it was captured by the gravity of our current sun, which, incredibly, the text suggests was only the secondary, or night star, in the previous Daystar system. This 270-year drift is a key period for calculating the later chronologies and explains the massive environmental shift that followed.
Okay, so that pre-atomic history, the Daystar system, effectively ends here. And humanity's story, the urban civilization part, doesn't really begin until Earth stabilizes much later.
Exactly. The conditions were just too chaotic before them.
Okay, quick check-in for you listening. We've set the stage. The timeline starts 5239 BC, Nemesis Cataclysm. The first 600-year Nur cycle ends in 4639 BC with the terrifying discovery of the simulacrum, leading to Anunnaki's civil war. Their sun, the Daystar, collapses and Earth drifts in darkness for 270 years. Still with us? Good. Let's see where Earth ends up. Right, that 270-year drift brings us to the next major marker, 4039 BC. This is the end of the second Nur cycle, meaning 1,200 years have passed since the 5239 BC start date, and this is when Earth finally stabilizes.
Stabilizes where?
In its current orbit between Venus and Mars.
And you mentioned earlier the sources find this position odd, mathematically speaking.
They do. The Tishis-Bode law, which describes a pattern in the spacing of planets in our solar system, suggests a planet should exist where the asteroid belt is, but Earth's position between Venus and Mars doesn't quite fit the mathematical progression.
So it's like physical evidence baked into orbital mechanics that Earth might not originally belong here.
That's the interpretation offered. The sources literally call Earth a sojourner, a wanderer, a refugee planet brought into this system.
And this date, 40 and 39 BC, isn't just pulled from texts, is it? You said it's encoded somewhere.
Yes. Remarkably, it seems to be encoded in the Great Pyramid of Giza. Research, particularly by engineer David Davison decades ago, analyzing the pyramid's internal and external geometry, found that the 4 base diagonals of the cornerstones point to this specific year, 4039 BC.
Point to it how?
As the starting point for Earth's current orbital chronology around this sun. It marks the beginning of the current system's first day, the first cycle of evening and morning, after the 270-year darkness.
But stabilizing wasn't a gentle process, was it? This date is associated with a massive cataclysm.
A huge one. It's remembered globally in myths as the capture flood, because this is when Earth captured its moon, Luna.
Captured the moon? You mean the moon wasn't always here?
Ancient traditions worldwide, from Africa to the Americas, speak of a time before the moon existed in the sky. The sources we're looking at suggest Luna isn't a natural satellite. They suspect it might be a hollowed-out planetoid or perhaps an artificial construct, a dark satellite deliberately placed or captured.
A dark satellite. That sounds sinister.
Well, its arrival certainly was. The texts describe it approaching Earth, suffering immense gravitational drag, maybe even having an irregular orbit initially. This close approach and capture caused a worldwide cataclysm, massive tides, earthquakes, volcanic activity.
Are there specific descriptions of what that looked like?
One source gives a terrifying eyewitness-like account. It says the moon appeared suddenly in the sky and grew rapidly larger, doubling in perceived size again and again, from 2 times to 4 to 8, reaching at least 16 times its current apparent diameter, maybe covering a whole degree of the sky.
Imagine seeing that.
Terrifying. And this massive gravitational shift triggered the cataclysms and also filled the atmosphere with a distinctive reddish-brown dust, or mud. The sources call it the red mud fallout.
Red mud. Does that connect to anything archaeologically?
It seems to. Survivors apparently memorialized this event by using red ochre in their burial practices afterwards, believing perhaps it was the substance their dead had been transformed into during the catastrophe. It's a recurring theme in early burials.
So, new planet, new orbit, new moon, devastating flood. The environment must have been completely different.
Radically different. The sources state that the existing human types, remnants from the previous Union world or Daystar system, weren't genetically equipped to survive this new, harsher biosphere.
Which necessitated more adjustments.
Yes, biological adjustments. Genetic manipulation became necessary again. And it's at this point, around 4039 BC, that the sources say the adversary, the programmed opposition, is formally introduced into the system. The Igigi.
The Igigi. Who or what were they?
Described as a new, specifically programmed human type introduced by the controllers of the simulacrum. They are characterized as morally bankrupt, devious, cunning, essentially designed to sow discord, maintain control hierarchies, and act as adversaries to other human types trying to achieve freedom or enlightenment.
So they're like agents within the simulation.
That's the implication. And the texts warn that their descendants or their influence persists even today, working to keep humanity divided and unaware of the larger reality.
And the moon itself, it's not just a captured rock, according to this narrative.
No, it's intrinsically linked to the control system. The sources describe Luna, this dark satellite, as the literal prison for those 7 rebellious Anunnaki kings we mentioned earlier, the ones cast down after the initial war.
The 7 evil gods are imprisoned in the moon.
That's the claim. Described as beings of immense cunning, they supposedly use their influence from this prison to distort spiritual truths into rigid, controlling dogma, inflicting misery and confusion on humanity below. The moon becomes both a symbol of the cataclysm and the ongoing mechanism of theological control.
Wow, okay. It's a lot to take in for the first 1,200 years.
It sets the stage for everything that follows.
All right, end of Chapter 1 mega recap. Let's nail this down for you. The story starts 5,239 BC, Nemesis Cataclysm, initiating a 7,344-year timeline structured in 3 2,448-year the number for cataclysm cycles. Two 600-year Ner cycles were as to 4039 BC. Key events. Earth stabilizes in its current, potentially anomalous orbit, a date encoded in the Great Pyramid. This stabilization coincides with the catastrophic capture flood, the sudden appearance of the moon, Luna, described as a dark satellite and prison for 7 rebellious Anunnaki kings. This environmental shift required genetic modifications, including the introduction of the adversarial Igigi human type.
Yeah.
Got it. Let's move into the next phase, Chapter 2. So Earth is stable, the moon is here, the Igigi are introduced. But the system isn't done resetting itself, is it? There's another major event coming up.
Not just an event, but the foundational reset for the world calendar described in Genesis. This happens in 3895 BC.
3895 BC. What triggers this one?
The sources call it the activation of the Phoenix weapon, or the Phoenix Protocol.
Phoenix, like the mythical bird rising from ashes. What exactly is this weapon or protocol? Is it a celestial body? Technology?
It's described more like a built-in fail-safe or defense mechanism within the simulacrum itself. Think of it as an automated response system. The Phoenix activates apparently when human society reaches a certain threshold, maybe a level of enlightenment or technological sophistication or collective consciousness that threatens the control structure maintained by the Igigi and the imprisoned 7.
So if humanity gets too close to figuring things out or breaking free, the Phoenix resets the game.
That's the core idea. It violently resets the simulation, typically through a pole shift cataclysm. It's referred to sometimes as the angel of death, not necessarily a being, but a mechanism that prevents humanity from achieving true, lasting freedom within this construct.
And this 3895 BC activation, what did it do physically?
It caused another global catastrophe. The texts speak of a pole shift, creating a new heavens and new earth, which directly echoes the language used in Genesis 1 and also in the Babylonian creation epic, the Enuma Elish.
So massive earthquakes, floods, the usual cataclysmic effects.
Yes. Quakes, continent-spanning floods, intense volcanic activity leading to fallout, meteoric rains. The stars were literally knocked out of their familiar places, forcing a complete reset of astronomical observations and calendars. And crucially, this date, 395 BC, becomes year 0 for the Anno Mundi AM system, the year of the world count used in Genesis.
And this reset introduces a defining feature of the pre-flood world, right? The vapor canopy.
Exactly. The vapor canopy is critical to understanding the physics and environment of this specific age. This era, initiated in 895 BC, lasted precisely 1,656 years, ending with the Great Flood in 2239 BC.
1,656 years. That's the exact time frame given in Genesis between Adam and Noah's flood, isn't it?
It is. The chronology matches perfectly. This canopy, likely a layer of water vapor in the upper atmosphere, would have had profound effects. It probably created a greenhouse effect, maybe contributing to the reported longevity of people in that era. It would have blocked direct sunlight, diffusing light during the day.
What about at night?
At night, it acted like a lens. It magnified the moon and the stars, making them appear incredibly bright and prominent. This, the sources argue, is why pre-flood cultures were often matriarchal and focused on goddess worship. Their primary celestial focus was the magnified moon, the dark satellite.
And the pole shift meant a new pole star, which required a new calendar system.
Correct. The pole shifted, and the new northern pole star became Alpha Draconis in the constellation Draco, the dragon. It's sometimes called Thuban. This necessitated a new calendar for this age, the Draconian calendar.
Draconian, based on the dragon constellation, what was unique about it?
It was a perfectly circular 360-day year. This 360-day system is referenced in various ancient systems, including the base math of the Maya long count and, crucially, the calculations involving the Sumerian Shar. The existence of this 360-day year before later forced change is another piece of evidence for this specific canopy era and the artificiality of the whole setup and the 1,200-year timeline.
Okay, so we have the 360-day year, the canopy, the focus on the moon. But the timeline isn't just structured by the 600-year Ner and the Phoenix resets. There's another cycle involving this Nemesis X object.
Yes, Nemesis X, which Sitchin called Nibiru, the planet of the crossing. The sources suggest it has a regular elliptical orbit of 792 years.
792 years. How does that break down?
It spends about 60 years close to the sun in the inner solar system, perihelion, causing potential gravitational and electromagnetic disruption, and then 732 years far out in deep space, aphelion.
Okay, 792-year cycle. When does it first become relevant after the 13,895 BC reset?
The calculations show Nemesis X beginning its first 60-year close approach in 399 BC. It passes near Earth during this period.
And 60 years later, at the end of that close approach, we hit another major date.
A massive one. 339 BC. This marks the completion of the third Ner cycle, 1800 years since 539 BC. And more importantly, this date is exactly 1200 years before the Great Flood of 2239 BC.
1200 years? That sounds significant.
It is, especially when you convert it using the corrected Shar value. 1200 years is 432,000 days. And 432,000 is a sacred recurring number in many ancient traditions, often linked to cosmic cycles.
And what happens in 3439 BC, exactly 1200 years or 432,000 days before the flood?
This is the date given for the appearance of a pivotal figure, Enki. He's presented as a great benefactor, a teacher, a bringer of knowledge. You probably know him better by his biblical name, Enoch.
Enki is Enoch, the one who walked with God and was taken.
That's the correlation the sources make. His arrival around the 35th century BC coincides precisely with that sudden, almost inexplicable explosion of high civilization, sophisticated agriculture, writing, mathematics, astronomy, massive architecture that appears seemingly out of nowhere in Mesopotamia and Egypt.
So it wasn't slow evolution, it was an inheritance. Knowledge brought by Enki Enoch.
That's the argument. It suggests civilization didn't slowly develop. It was jump-started by this external input. Enki is specifically credited with initiating pre-flood Egyptian civilization and is linked directly to the design and construction of the Great Pyramid Complex at a place the Sumerians called Eridu, which corresponds to the biblical Erad.
Is there astronomical evidence linking the pyramid to this date?
Yes. The original descending passage in the Great Pyramid, before later modifications, was precisely angled to point directly at the pole star of that era, Alpha Draconis, in the year 3440 BC. It's like a timestamp confirming when they descended or began their work there.
But Enki Enoch has a complicated reputation in these texts, right? He's a benefactor, but also sometimes called the serpent. Why?
It points to that internal conflict among the Anunnaki. Enki seems to have been a dissenter, someone who disagreed with the controlling faction. The sources suggest he understood the Phoenix Protocol, foresaw the coming reset, the Great Flood, and decided to break ranks. He apparently warned a specific human. He favored a wise man, known in Babylonian texts as Utnebishtim, the prototype for the biblical Noah, or perhaps the Sudra in some versions, about the impending flood. This violated an oath of secrecy the Anunnaki committee had supposedly taken about the simulacrum and its destructive cycles.
So by warning humanity, he became a deceiver, a serpent to his own kind, the controlling Anunnaki, but a benefactor to us, giving a favored lineage a chance to survive.
Exactly. It highlights the factionalism. Not all Anunnaki were necessarily aligned with the control system. Enki represents a potential rebel force working within the construct.
Okay, let's do a micro recap. We had the big Genesis reset in 320-95 BC, triggered by the Phoenix Protocol. This created the 1656-year pre-flood world with its vapor canopy and the 360-day draconian calendar, pole star Alpha Draconis. Then the 792-year Nemesis X cycle becomes important. Its close approach ends in 3439 BC, exactly 1,200 years, or 432,000 Shar's days, before the Great Flood. This marks the arrival of Enki, Enoch, sparking a sudden leap in civilization, particularly focused on the Great Pyramid Complex, which seems astronomically aligned to his arrival time. Enki is both benefactor and serpent due to warning humans about the coming flood. Phew, keeping track.
Now, to really understand the dynamics leading up to the flood and Enki's actions, we need to quickly touch on the different human types present and the ongoing genetic interference by the Anunnaki.
Right, we mentioned the indigenous people, the Adamo.
Yes, the original inhabitants described in the texts, dark-skinned, black-haired, black-eyed, generally smaller in stature. They were apparently living in a more matriarchal society, focused on mother-goddess worship. The Sumerians proudly call themselves the Lugal Sag-Giga, the black-headed people, directly referencing this heritage.
But the Anunnaki had been experimenting long before the Adamo became the focus, right? You mentioned Cro-Magnon earlier.
Correct. The sources indicate that an earlier Anunna group, designated Homo Wunduno, had created Cro-Magnon man, using mammalian DNA combined with something else. Cro-Magnons appeared suddenly in the fossil record, far superior to Neanderthals, with advanced tools, art, and, interestingly, a cranial capacity larger than modern humans.
A potentially superior human type. What happened to them?
According to these texts, their civilization thrived. They mastered their environment, developed sophisticated culture, and then, crucially, they began to understand something profound about their own nature, potentially discovering a path to personal immortality or a way to break free from the simulacrum's constraints. They were getting too close to self-mastery.
And the Anunnaki controllers, the Homo Annunna, couldn't allow that?
It infuriated them. A race designed perhaps for servitude was threatening to break its chains. So the sources describe a Cro-Magnon reset happening sometime before 4309 BC. This involved dangerous genetic alterations, creating monsters bereft of souls, essentially degrading them just before their civilization was wiped out by a catastrophe.
And the evidence for that catastrophe.
Again, that recurring motif, the use of red mud or red ochre in their burials, suggesting they perished under the red dust of a cataclysm, possibly linked to that earlier moon capture event or another reset.
So Cro-Magnon was a failed experiment from the controller's perspective. When Enki arrived later, a different approach was needed.
Yes, a human type that was advanced enough to build and maintain civilization, but perhaps more manageable, more controllable. Enki is credited with manufacturing an upgraded human by adding more Anunnaki DNA into the mix, likely using females from the Adamu lineage to birth these new civilized humans who could procreate. This stock became the basis for the Sumerians.
But then comes the most famous intervention, the one described in Genesis 6.
Ah, yes. The sons of God and the daughters of men.
The Watchers taking human wives.
Exactly. The tall, pale-skinned, bearded Anunnaki men, called the Watchers, or Sons of God, began interbreeding with the indigenous Adamo women, the daughters of man. The sources, like the Book of Enoch, describe the sheer terror this caused among the indigenous people. Their wives started giving birth to these huge, fair-skinned babies, sometimes with unusual eye colors described like gemstones. They literally accused their wives of sleeping with angels.
The offspring of these unions were
The Nephilim. The name is often translated as fallen ones, but it can also mean those who were cast down, or even those who dropped down, perhaps referring to their partly celestial origin.
And these Nephilim became the ruling class.
Yes, they were the mighty men of old, men of renown mentioned in Genesis. They were taller, often fairer-skinned, likely had greater intelligence or abilities derived from their Anunnaki fathers. They effectively became the hybrid aristocracy, the god kings of the pre-flood world, imposing a more patriarchal system derived from the Anunnaki over the older matriarchal Adamic culture. This Nephilim dynasty is what defines the next major era leading up to the flood.
Okay, end of Chapter 2 mega recap. We saw the Anunnaki constantly tinkering with human genetics. Early Cro-Magnons were reset after becoming too advanced. Inkinok arrived, 30439 BC, and helped create a more civilized human stock, linked to the Adamu. Then, Anunnaki Watchers interbred with Adamu women, producing the hybrid Nephilim dynasty, Genesis 6. This sets the stage for their rule. Underlying all this is the framework of the Phoenix reset in 3895 BC, which established the 1656-year Weber canopy world and the 360-day Draconian calendar. It's a complex interplay of genetics, control, and cosmic cycles. All right, Chapter 3. We're now in the era dominated by these Nephilim, the hybrid offspring. This is the peak of the Anunnaki influence on Earth before the flood, right?
Absolutely. This is when their dynasty takes formal control. The sources, particularly the Sumerian king list, mark the beginning of the reign of 7 kings in the year 2909 BC.
7 specific kings, ruling from where?
They ruled from 5 major cities, a federation sometimes called Pentapolis, in later Greek accounts referencing Berossus. These cities are listed in the king list, places like Eridu, Badtabira, Larak, Sipar, and Shuruppak. This is the heart of the pre-flood empire.
Now, the Sumerian king list gives these kings incredibly long reigns, adding up to that figure Sitchin used, 249,200 somethings. This is where the Shar correction is crucial, isn't it?
This is the crucial calculation. The king list says the total reign before the flood was 241,200 Shars. If you assume, like Sitchin did, that a Shar is 3,600 years, you get an impossible timeline. But if you apply the corrected understanding that a Shar is a day or a turning, and use the calendar system we know was in place during that canopy era.
The 360-day Draconian calendar.
Exactly. You take 241,200 days, Shars, and divide by the 360 days in their year. What do you get?
Precisely 670 years, not hundreds of thousands. And if this dynasty began in 2909 BC and lasted 670 years, when does it end?
2909 minus 670. That's 2239 BC? 2239 BC. The exact, traditionally accepted date for the Great Flood, based on numerous ancient chronologies. The math locks the corrected Shar value and the 670-year reign directly to the flood date. It's stunning confirmation.
So the Nephilim dynasty ruled for exactly 670 years, ending precisely at the flood. Is this dynasty remembered anywhere else?
Yes, interestingly, ancient Chinese traditions speak of a similar period ruled by dragon kings, who were also often described as tall, bearded rulers. It seems to be a parallel memory of the same Nephilim aristocracy.
And these 7 kings, were they Nephilim themselves or the original Anunnaki?
The texts are a bit complex here. They are often identified with those original 7 rebellious Anunnaki who were cast down, the ones supposedly imprisoned in the moon. They're called the 7 evil gods, the Watchers, the 7 serpents of death. They likely ruled through their Nephilim offspring or agents on Earth.
Yeah, so the rulers are also the prisoners in the moon. How does that work?
It suggests a very strange dynamic. Perhaps they ruled remotely through psychic influence or technology from the dark satellite. Or maybe the kings on Earth were direct representatives carrying out their will. Some Babylonian hymns describe them cryptically. Quote, they are 7 in the depths of the ocean primordial, they are 7 in the vault of heaven supreme. It implies they are simultaneously imprisoned and exerting influence. Their goal seems to be maintaining control and causing suffering from their lunar prison.
Okay, so during this 670-year reign of the 7 kings, or their proxies, Earth saw some massive construction projects, didn't it? Including the most famous one of all.
Yes, the Great Pyramid of Giza. The sources place its construction firmly within this Nephilim era, starting during Enoch's presence.
How long did it take to build, according to these texts?
The time frame given is remarkably specific, 90 years, which is 1080 months. It was built directly on the exposed bedrock of the Giza Plateau, and its completion date is given as 2815 BC.
2815 BC. How does that relate to the Anno Mundi timeline?
2815 BC is exactly 1080. Anno Mundi, 1080 years after the 395 BC reset. The number 1080, like 4320, is another one of those sacred geometry numbers that keeps appearing.
And the construction itself. Definitely not just slaves hauling blocks with ropes.
Absolutely not, according to this material. The precision is impossible with primitive tools. The sources hint at advanced technology, possibly using liquefied rock like limestone and granite slurries that were poured and hardened, essentially geopolymers shaped with extreme, maybe laser-like precision.
We've all heard it wasn't a tomb, so what was its purpose, according to Enki's faction or these texts?
It was a machine, a technological device. The empty sarcophagus was likely deliberate misdirection. Its primary function seems to have been twofold. Firstly, a repository of knowledge encoding mathematical constants and astronomical data. Secondly, and more critically, it served as a kind of collapse protocol system.
Collapse protocol, what does that mean?
It means the structure itself contains encoded information about the future cycles of destruction, specifically the future activations of the Phoenix Protocol. Dates like 2040, 2046, 2070, 2104 are apparently referenced within its geometry and measurements. It's like a warning system and maybe even an escape mechanism.
An escape mechanism from the simulacrum.
That's the implication. The design itself is described as a prophecy in stone, aimed at facilitating the gradual yet total freedom of the human race from this dungeon of the demiurge being the creator or controller of this flawed reality.
So Enoch, the dissenter, helped build this incredible structure that contains the keys to understanding and possibly escaping the very system the other Anunnaki, the 7 Kings faction, were trying to maintain.
That seems to be the narrative. It's the ultimate act of rebellion, embedding the escape plan right in the heart of the controlled territory. Even the ancient name for the Giza complex, Irum, is linked to a mythical terrestrial paradise, Irum of the columns, hinting at its transcendental purpose. And it was built before widespread writing, confirming its technolithic origin knowledge embedded in stone, not just scrolls.
Okay, micro recap time. The Nephilim dynasty, led by the 7 kings, linked to the imprisoned Anunnaki in the moon, ruled for exactly 670 years, from 2909 BC to 2239 BC. This duration is confirmed by correcting the Sumerian Shar to mean a day within the 360-day draconian year. During their reign, the Great Pyramid was built, completed 2815 BC, 1080 AM, using advanced technology. Its purpose, not a tomb, but a technological device encoding future Phoenix reset dates, like 2040, 2046, and serving as a potential collapse protocol system for escaping the simulacrum, likely initiated by the dissenter Enoch.
The cycles keep turning. Remember Nemesis X and its 792-year orbit.
Right, the 60 years in, 732 years out.
Well, its perihelion passage that started around 334499 BC ends, and it begins heading back out to deep space around 2647 BC.
2647 BC. Does its departure signify anything important?
It marks a major shift in the Anunnaki presence. This is seen as the end of the direct contact period and the beginning of what the sources call the abandonment and shock period. It's also referred to as the post-technolithic period.
Abandonment, meaning the Anunnaki largely left.
A significant portion of them, yes. The main Anunna presence seems to vanish around this time. They left behind certain specialists, apparently Caucasian Homo sapiens, tasked with preserving the remaining knowledge and perhaps overseeing the human populations. But the direct, overt influence diminishes greatly.
And this period lasts until the flood.
Yes, it's a period of 408 years, from 2647 BC down to 2239 BC, and it's characterized by a rapid decline.
What kind of decline?
A loss of that high technolithic knowledge. Without the direct guidance or technology of the Anunna, human society started to fragment. We see the rise of social unrest, increased tribalism, even evidence of race-based segregation in urban planning. And critically, this is when priesthoods really began to consolidate power.
How did the priesthoods gain power?
By twisting the narrative. The memory of the Anunnaki, including perhaps benevolent figures like Enki, got distorted. Priests began portraying them as demanding, fearsome gods who required appeasement, rituals, and sacrifices to keep cosmic order. Cuneiform texts from this era contain phrases like, "He who fears the Anunnaki lengthens his days," showing this shift towards fear-based religious control.
So in just 400 years after the main Anunnaki left, society degenerated, knowledge was lost, and religion became a tool of control.
It's presented as a stark warning, but what happens when the technological or guiding influence is withdrawn, how quickly human structures can degrade and fall prey to manipulation. And this period of decline, the 408-year abandonment period, culminates precisely on schedule. In 2239 BC, the big one hits. The Great Deluge, Noah's flood.
2239 BC. Let's just reiterate how this date locks everything together.
Okay, first, it's exactly 1,656 years after the 3,895 BC Genesis reset, matching the biblical timeline for the pre-flood world under the vapor canopy. Second, it's exactly 670 years after the start of the Seven Kings dynasty in 2909 BC, confirming their reign length based on the Shar correction. Third, it marks the predicted return of the Phoenix phenomena.
So the flood wasn't just rain, it was the Phoenix protocol activating again.
Yes, causing the collapse of that atmospheric vapor canopy. Imagine trillions of tons of water held aloft, just letting go. Combined with likely pole shift effects, massive volcanic resurfacing, tsunamis. The sources also mention the return of the red mud fallout. Geologically, this event is strongly linked to the formation of the Mediterranean and Black Seas, suggesting immense water displacement and crustal shifts rather than necessarily a gentle, global inundation covering Mount Everest.
It was a violent, world-altering reset.
A total reset. It wiped the slate clean, ended the Nephilim dynasty, and brought the pre-flood era, the canopy world, to a definitive catastrophic end.
The precision is just striking. If the flood is 2239 BC, then Enki's arrival was exactly 1,200 years before. The Seven Kings ruled exactly 670 years before. The canopy lasted exactly 656 years. It feels less like history and more like engineering.
That's the core argument derived from these sources. It points towards a reality operating on a highly structured, predictable, and possibly artificial timetable.
Okay, end of Chapter 3 mega recap. The hybrid Nephilim dynasty, led by the Seven Kings, ruled for a confirmed 670 years, 2909-2239 BC, a period validated by the Shar's day correction using the 360-day year. During this time, the Great Pyramid was built, completed 2815 BC, as a technological repository and potential escape collapse protocol system. The departure of the main Anunna group around 2647 BC, Nemesis X leaving, initiated the 408-year abandonment period, marked by knowledge loss and the rise of manipulative priesthoods. This era ended precisely in 2239 BC with the Great Flood, triggered by the Phoenix Protocol collapsing the 1,656-year-old vapor canopy, resetting the world. Chapter 4. The flood supposedly wiped the slate clean, but the underlying system, the simulacrum, the cycles, they didn't go away, did they?
Not at all. The reset just started a new phase, but the governing patterns continued. The Nemesis X cycle, the Phoenix cycle, they kept ticking along, triggering further resets and manipulations. History just kept repeating the known patterns.
Okay, so the flood was 2239 BC. When does the next major disruption occur according to the cycles?
We look to the Nemesis X orbit, that 792-year cycle. Add 792 years to 2239 BC.
That brings us to 1447 BC. Oh, wait, that's the Exodus date. Let's back up. Was there a Nemesis event before that? Did it return earlier?
Good point. Nemesis X has that 60-year perihelion window. The sources actually point to its reappearance causing chaos earlier, around 1915 BC. That's roughly 324 years after the flood. Not a full cycle, but marking its return to the inner system.
1915 BC. What happened then?
This is when the sources describe the appearance of the sky dragon, also known as Tiamat in Babylonian texts, or Typhon in Greek myths.
A literal dragon in the sky.
Probably not. It's interpreted as a massive flux to a visible channel of immense electrical energy discharging between planetary bodies, perhaps Nemesis X interacting with Earth or other planets as it returned. It caused darkness during the day, atmospheric disturbances, and apparently a rain of stones or meteorites.
And this coincides with a specific historical figure.
Yes. This is dated to the 32nd year of the reign of Nimrod, the great post-flood ruler. The Sumerians knew him as Amar-Udak, who later became the chief god of Babylon, Marduk.
Marduk, the god associated with the thunderbolt, like Zeus.
Exactly. The mythology depicts Marduk battling and conquering the chaos monster Tiamat, the sky dragon flux tube. His rise to prominence represents the reestablishment of order, Anunnaki style, after this cosmic disruption. His reign ushered in an era of absolute submission, with widespread inscriptions detailing prayers and sacrifices needed to appease the Anunnaki gods and keep the heavens stable.
Okay, so Marduk rises around 1915 BC. Then comes one of the most famous stories from this era, the Tower of Babel. When was that?
The sources place the construction attempt around 1899 BC. Again, it's presented not just as a ziggurat, but as a technological project.
Yeah.
Babel, the name means gate of God.
A gate, like the pyramid, potentially a way to access something. Or escape.
That's how the ancient ones, those 7 kings supposedly still influencing things from the moon, perceived it. They saw it as a threat, another potential breach in their control system.
And their reaction was swift and decisive.
Instantaneous and catastrophic, according to the texts. The tower was destroyed, seemingly by thunderbolts from the sky, again suggesting directed energy or technology. But the more insidious part was the aftermath.
The confusion of tongues.
Yes, but potentially not just linguistic confusion. The sources hint at a technological mind reprogramming event. A weaponized confusion deliberately used to shatter human collective consciousness, break down communication, and scatter humanity, making large-scale cooperation and rebellion much harder. This event also marks the end of the Anunnaki's direct, physical presence. Figures like Enki vanished from the record after Babel. After the Babel incident, we looked for the next Phoenix reset marker. Remember, the flood was 2239 BC. The Phoenix seems to operate on multiples of roughly 138 years, but a major one hit 552 years after the flood.
552 years, so 2239 minus 552, that's 1687 BC.
Exactly. This is the date associated with the Ogygian deluge mentioned in Greek mythology. It was another major cataclysm that effectively wiped out the remaining Bronze Age civilizations across the Mediterranean and Near East. It was followed by a prolonged period of darkness and cold, a volcanic winter lasting maybe 25 years due to dust veil effects.
A major setback for civilization. Then we jump forward again to that date we mentioned earlier, 1447 BC.
Yes, the date widely accepted by scholars who take the biblical chronology seriously for the exodus of the Israelites. Specifically, the tribe of Dan is often mentioned in these alternative sources. From Egypt, accompanied by the legendary 10 plagues.
Now, you said this date connects back to that foundational cataclysm number.
It connects perfectly. Remember, the 895 BC Genesis reset started the Anno Mundi count. The year 1447 BC is precisely 2448 AM. And 2448 is the ancient Egyptian number for
Cataclysm.
Yeah.
It's like the system itself flagged the Exodus date as a scheduled major destruction event using their own numerical code. It cannot be a coincidence.
That's chilling. And there's another cycle confirming this date. Yes, the Nemesis X cycle. The Exodus in 1447 BC occurs exactly 792 years after the Great Flood in 2239 BC. One full Nemesis cycle later, another massive cataclysm and societal reset occurs perfectly on schedule. The plagues, the parting of the sea, these events are framed as consequences of extreme geophysical and atmospheric turmoil linked to this cyclical return.
So the Exodus wasn't just a localized event. It was part of a larger system-wide reset timed to these cycles. What about the Sothic cycle in Egypt? Does that fit in?
It does, but not in the way mainstream Egyptology often assumes. The Sothic cycle is this period of 1,461 years related to the star Sirius. It's usually considered purely astronomical. But these sources suggest its significance is historical. It's the memory of the time period leading up to the Exodus. 1,461 years before 1447 BC brings you back to around 2908 BC, the start of the Nephilim dynasty. It's another chronological marker pointing towards the Exodus as a preordained critical point.
So the Exodus itself, possibly linked to the massive volcanic eruption of Thera, Santorini, around that time, was another synchronized, technologically influenced reset of the dominant power, Egypt, and surrounding regions.
That's the picture painted by synthesizing these sources' biblical narrative reflecting a real, cyclical, cataclysmic event within the Anunnaki timeline.
Okay, Micro recap. After the flood, the cycles continued. Nemesis X returned around 1915 BC, linked to Marduk's rise and the Sky Dragon. The Tower of Babel, 1899 BC, was seen as a technological threat and destroyed, followed by a confusion of tongues possibly involving mind reprogramming. A phoenix cycle hit in 1687 BC, a Gigant deluge, devastating Bronze Age cultures. The next major reset was the Exodus in 1447 BC. This date is critical. It's exactly 2448 AM, the cataclysm number, since the Genesis reset, and exactly 792 years, one Nemesis cycle, after the Great Flood, confirming the cyclical, structured nature of these events.
The pattern of periodic resets continues after the Exodus, but the next major one we need to focus on caused a permanent physical change to the Earth system itself, forcing a fundamental alteration in how humanity perceived time.
A physical change to Earth's movement. When was this?
This occurs in 713 BC.
713 BC. What happened?
This is the date associated with the biblical story of the sundial of Ahaz, where the sun apparently stopped or moved backwards in the sky by 10 degrees. While it sounds mythological, the sources suggest a real, observable celestial event occurred. It also coincided with a devastating incident mentioned in the Bible and Assyrian records, the sudden destruction of 185,000 Assyrian soldiers besieging Jerusalem.
Destroyed how?
Vaporized. Again, the description points towards a blast from the sky, likely another flux tube event, a massive electrical discharge between celestial bodies, perhaps linked to Nemesis X or another object interacting with Earth's magnetosphere.
But the key outcome was the change to the Earth's orbit or rotation?
Yes. This event, whatever its precise mechanics, was so profound that it physically altered Earth's movement enough to break the existing calendar system. The solar year, which had reliably been 360 days throughout the Draconian canopy era and even in the centuries after the flood, was suddenly and permanently changed.
Changed to what?
To our current 365.25-day solar year. Cultures all over the world which had previously used 360-day calendars, like ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, India, China, even early Rome and Mesoamerica, were forced to abruptly change their systems around this time in the 8th century BC to accommodate the new, longer year.
Is there external evidence for this calendar shift around 713 BC?
Yes, the Mayan long count provides strong corroboration. The long count began way back in 3113 BC, based entirely on cycles of the 360-day year, the ton. It reached the end of its sixth Bacton, a period of 144,000 days, precisely in 713 BC. This date marked a crisis point in their calendar, forcing recalibrations. The fact that a sophisticated system like the Mayan calendar used a 360-day year for over 2,400 years, only to be disrupted around 713 BC, is powerful evidence that the Earth's solar year was different before that time.
So 713 BC represents a fundamental physical reconfiguration of the simulation's parameters, specifically altering the perception and measurement of time itself.
Exactly. It's perhaps the most dramatic intervention in the post-flood era, permanently breaking the old world's temporal framework and forcing humanity onto the 365.25-day clock we still use today.
End of Chapter 4 Mega Recap. The post-flood era saw continued cyclical resets. Key events included the Nemesis X return, 1915 BC, the Tower of Babel destruction, 1899 BC, with its technological confusion of tongues, the Ogygian deluge, 1687 BC, via the Phoenix cycle, and the crucial Exodus cataclysm, 1447 BCC, precisely timed to both the 2448 AM marker and the 792-year Nemesis cycle. The most profound event was in 713 BC, a celestial disturbance, sundial of Ahaz, Assyrian army destruction, physically altered Earth's orbit rotation, forcing a global calendar change from the ancient 360-day year to the current 365.25-day year, breaking the old temporal reality. Chapter 5. We've come through ancient history, the flood, the calendar change, but the implication is that these cycles, this Anunnaki structure, didn't just stop in 713 BC. It extends right into more recent history and even into our future.
That's the core message. The patterns continue, the cycles repeat, seemingly marching towards a predetermined endpoint. The simulacrum keeps running its program.
Okay, so after the 713 BC calendar change, when does the next significant reset pattern appear?
We see the Phoenix cycle periodicity showing up again. Remember, the Ogygian deluge was 1687 BC. If we look at another 1656-year cycle, like the pre-flood canopy duration, starting from then.
1687 BC minus 1656 years. That lands in 31 BC.
Exactly. And what happens around 31 BC? Historically, it's the year of the Battle of Actium, the end of the Roman Republic, but the sources connect this date to the final collapse of the Olmec civilization in the Yucatan Peninsula, apparently due to massive continental earthquakes. There are also reports of a sky dragon being observed over Egypt again around this time. It marks another synchronized collapse or high set point, perfectly fitting the 1656-year Phoenix pattern.
Okay, then we look for the 600-year Nurk cycle, the one linked to theological or mental shifts. The last one we discussed ended in 4639 BC. Wait, that's too far back. When would a Nurk cycle hit closer to our time?
Let's project forward from around the time of Christ. If we consider a Ner cycle potentially concluding around the 2nd century AD, we hit 162 AD.
162 AD. What happened then?
This year marks the beginning of the Antonine Plague, a devastating pandemic that started in the east, possibly China, and spread westward over about 11 years. It severely weakened the Roman Empire, contributed to the end of the Pax Romana, and is also linked to the collapse of the Han Dynasty in China, ushering in a period known as the Asian Dark Age.
So a 600-year Ner cycle potentially culminates in a global pandemic that resets major empires and alters the theological social landscape.
It fits the pattern described for the Ner, a major revolution in human affairs, in this case, a biological and societal one.
But the most critical date in the modern era, according to these sources, the one that marks the end of the entire grand cycle started way back when, is 1962 AD.
Yes, 1962 AD. This year is pinpointed as a massive nodal point. Why? Because it marks the completion of 12 full 600-year Ner cycles since the chronology began back in 5239 BC. 12 times 600 is 7,200 years. This marks the end of the primary 7,200-year Anunnaki chronology.
The end of their main program cycle. What were the implications?
According to the texts, this completion allowed certain dormant programs to reactivate. Specifically, it permitted the Igigi, remember them, the adversarial human type introduced back in 4039 BC, or their modern remnants influence, to resume activities like hybridization and abduction programs.
Why? In preparation for what?
In preparation for the potential return of the imprisoned 7 kings, whose release protocol seems timed for the mid-21st century, 1962 was like flipping a switch to begin the endgame preparations.
Wow. Are there any scientific or observable anomalies cited around 1962 that align with this?
It's quite remarkable. The sources point to 3 specific things happening right around that time. First, NASA scientists, analyzing seismic data from lunar impacts, started seriously considering the possibility that the moon is hollow lending support to the dark satellite theory. Second, radio telescopes detected unusually strong X-ray emissions coming from the Cygnus X1 region, the Cygnus Rift, suggesting some kind of major energy event or transmission focused toward our solar system. And third, the U.S. military conducted high-altitude circular tests, specifically Operation Fishbowl series in 1962. Some interpretations of the unexpected results, like the artificial radiation belts created, led certain researchers, according to these sources, to conclude that Earth exists within a closed, contained environment, essentially confirming the simulacrum or Dyson shell concept from the Anunnaki texts.
So, right as the Anunnaki 7,200-year cycle concludes, modern science inadvertently starts finding evidence for a hollow moon and a contained reality, and the Igigi restart their programs. That's unsettlingly coherent.
And culturally. The sources also pinpoint 1962 as a turning point for accelerating spiritual and moral decay, particularly in the U.S. They cite the Supreme Court ruling against mandatory prayer in public schools as a key symbolic event, coinciding with the beginning of a decline in U.S. industrial power and a shift in societal values.
Framed as the Igigi influence starting to manipulate society more overtly for the final phase.
That's the interpretation offered, weakening the traditional moral fabric to make society more susceptible to the final control measures.
Okay, micro recap. The ancient cycles continued. 31 BC saw a Phoenix pattern reset, Olmec collapse, Sky Dragon. 162 AD marked a possible 600-year Ner cycle ending with a major pandemic, Antonine Plague. The critical modern date is 1962 AD, the end of the 7,200-year Anunnaki chronology, 600 years. This date allegedly allowed the Igigi influence to reactivate, hybridization abduction programs, and coincided with scientific anomalies supporting the hollow moon theory and the simulacrum Dyson shell concept, Operation Fishbowl, plus a perceived acceleration of cultural decay.
So if 1962 restarts the endgame preparations, we need to go back to those 7 kings supposedly imprisoned in the moon, the dark satellite. Their release mechanism is key to understanding the next phase.
Right, you mentioned the release depends on human belief, an observer-dependent universe.
Exactly. The idea is that these entities can't fully manifest or return unless a significant portion of the collective human mind believes in them, acknowledges their existence, essentially observes them back into reality. The psychic energy of belief empowers them.
That's a very strange concept. How would they generate that belief on a mass scale?
This is where the work of Zechariah Sitchin becomes central to this narrative, though in a very controversial way.
How so? Sitchin popularized the Anunnaki, but these sources identify him as, what was it, a prophet of the dark satellite.
That's the term used. It's a huge claim, obviously. But the argument presented in these materials is that Sitchin had access to the evidence, the mathematical proofs, the calendrical analysis, showing that the Shar was a day, not 3,600 years.
But he promoted the 3,600-year Shar, the massive timeline.
He did. And the sources allege this wasn't an honest mistake. They claim he deliberately used the hyperinflated timeline because it was necessary to make his ancient astronaut theories palatable to the mainstream uniformitarian worldview, which demands vast ages. They even suggest his work receives funding from establishment entities, like the Rockefeller Foundation, who might have had an interest in promoting this specific misleading narrative.
Why promote a mathematically incorrect timeline? How does that help the dark satellite agents?
Think about it. Believing that beings lived and ruled for hundreds of thousands of years requires a huge leap of faith, a suspension of critical thinking and mathematical logic. This act of intellectual submission, this willingness to accept the impossible time frame, is presented as the exact mental state that controllers want. It primes the collective unconscious to accept the unbelievable, paving the way for belief in the seven kings themselves.
So Sitchin's work, intentionally or not, served as a mass psychological priming operation for the return of these entities.
That's the claim. And the timing is presented as evidence. Sitchin's first major book, The 12th Planet, came out in 1976.
Is that year significant in the timeline?
It appears to be. Remember the destruction of the Tower of Babel back in 1899 BC? There's a complex chronological pattern described, an isometric cycle linked to that event, spanning 1,976 years.
1,976 years, projecting forward from 1899 BC.
No, the pattern is more complex, but it culminates in a release window. The calculation points towards the year 2052 AD as the target date for the release or return of the seven kings from the moon. Sitchin's work starting in 1976 is seen as the precisely timed public relations campaign, the mass awakening of belief needed to meet the observer-dependent universe criteria before that 2052 date arrives. He functioned, perhaps unknowingly, as a gatekeeper, opening the psychic door for their return.
Okay, so we have the Ajiji active since 62, Sitchin priming the collective mind since 76, aiming for a potential return of the Seven Kings around 2052. What about the Phoenix? Does it have a final act in this endgame?
It does. The encoded prophecies within the Great Pyramid, as interpreted by these sources, point to a final activation. The date given is incredibly specific. May 15th, 16th, 2040.
2040, that's very close. What's predicted to happen?
The return of the Phoenix phenomena, the angel of death, it's seen as the ultimate reset mechanism, triggered presumably because humanity, by that point, might reach a level of technological sophistication or collective awareness that genuinely threatens the foundations of the simulacrum. It's the final fail-safe reset programmed into the system.
And there's another date right after that from a different source.
Yes, from the Maya long count. As we discussed, it was based on the 360-day year and started back in the 3113 BC. The full cycle consists of 13 backtons, each backton being 144,000 days. While the popular end date was 2012, a more precise calculation based on astronomical alignments and the corrected historical timeline points to the true end of the 13 backtons falling in 2046 AD.
2046, so just 6 years after the predicted Phoenix event. What does the end of the Mayan cycle signify?
Cataclysm. Specifically, predictions derived from this corrected end date include a major pole shift and devastating destruction, particularly focused on North America. The synchronicity of the pyramid encoding 2040 and the Mayan cycle pointing to 2046 is presented as the strongest possible warning of an imminent major transformation or reset phase.
And after this 2040-2046 period of upheaval, the sources predict a fundamental change to Earth's physics. You called it the quickening.
Yes, the quickening. Following this cataclysmic period, the prediction is that Earth's rotation and orbit will be altered again, perhaps shifting its position relative to the Sun or the galactic plane. The result: time itself speeds up from our perspective. Years become much shorter, only 240 days long, and days shrink to just 16 hours.
240-day years, 16-hour days, that sounds like something out of biblical prophecy.
It directly matches descriptions of time speeding up found in texts like the Book of Revelation. This quickening would fundamentally alter human biology, perception, and the very fabric of reality, signaling the absolute final phase of the current construct.
And this final phase leads to the ultimate end date of the entire Anunnaki chronology.
Yes. The full 7,344-year timeline, starting in 5,239 BC, reaches its conclusion. But more relevantly, the 6,000-year period that began with the 395 BC Genesis reset, often associated with the permitted reign of the fallen ones or the duration of the prison, culminates in 2106 AD.
2106 AD, what happens then?
This date, marking the end of the tribulation period following the quickening, is identified in these sources as the year of the ultimate exodus.
Exodus, from what?
From the construct, from a simulacra. For those individuals who have understood the nature of the prison, who have navigated the cycles, who have overcome the control system, 2106 AD represents the potential moment of liberation, of transcending this reality. They become, in the terminology used, participants in a monument of man, fulfilling the Great Pyramid's ultimate purpose as an escape hatch.
Okay, end of Chapter 5 mega recap. The modern chronology points 1962 AD as a key turning point. The end of the 7,200-year Anunnaki cycle, coinciding with scientific hints of the simulacrum, hollow moon, Dyson shell, and the alleged reactivation of Igigi programs. Zechariah Sitchin's work, starting 1976, is controversially framed as a psychological priming operation, using a flawed timeline to prepare humanity for the potential return of the imprisoned seven kings around 2052 AD, based on observer-dependent reality principles. The final escape reset protocols are encoded. The Phoenix activation predicted for May 2040, followed closely by the Maya-long count ending in 2046, predicting pole shift destruction. This leads to the quickening, 240-day years, 16-hour days, culminating in the potential exodus from the construct in 2106 AD, the 6,000th year from the Genesis reset.
So if we try to, connect all these dots, synthesize this incredibly detailed, precise chronologies, the picture that emerges is just staggering. You look at the whole 7,344-year timeline, orchestrated by these interlocking cycles, the 600-year Nur, the 792-year Nemesis X return, the roughly 138-year Phoenix pulse.
It really doesn't feel like random history, the repetition, the exactitude.
Exactly. The precise timing of these major cataclysms, the Gion flood or moon capture, the Great Flood, the RGG deluge, the Exodus cataclysm, that 713 BC calendar reset, it reinforces that core, unsettling idea from the sources. The future is known because it already occurred in the past. It's like we're on a repeating track.
And the core conflict driving this whole drama, this whole repeating track, seems to be between these two fundamentally different human expressions.
Right. On one side, you have the indigenous, dark-skinned, generally matriarchal cultures, perhaps more attuned to the earth. On the other, you have these technologically advanced, pale-skinned, patriarchal Anunnaki newcomers who seem obsessed with control, genetic manipulation, and using these cyclical resets, especially the Phoenix mechanism, whenever humanity gets too close to genuine enlightenment or freedom.
Our entire history, then, is framed not as evolution, but as a series of engineered conflicts and controlled resets within this prison.
That's the inescapable conclusion, if you accept the corrected chronology presented in these sources. It suggests that history, politics, culture, even religion have been deliberately manipulated to keep us ignorant, divided, and unaware of our true situation, confined within this holographic construct, this dungeon of the demiurge, as the Gnostics might have called it.
So understanding this pattern, rejecting the misleading timelines like Sitchin's, and really grasping the mathematical precision laid out in these ancient texts, that's the first step.
It has to be. According to this framework, recognizing the structure of the prison, understanding its operating system, its predictable cycles, that's the essential first step towards possibly finding a way to disrupt the program, or at least navigate the final phase consciously towards that potential exodus.
We talked about Enki Enoch being the dissenter, the one who supposedly built the Great Pyramid as this technological time capsule, encoding the escape protocols, the dates like 2040, 2046, 2106. He left the clues in stone. We now have technologies, computers, advanced physics, global communication far beyond what was available for most of this timeline. So here's the final thought for you to ponder. We know the Anunnaki timeline seems to operate on the principle that the future repeats the past. We saw the Cro-Magnon civilization apparently destroyed because they got too close to self-mastery, perhaps finding a way to collapse the simulacrum's rules. Considering our current trajectory with things like AI development, virtual reality, consciousness research, even genetic engineering hitting exponential curves, what specific technological or societal trend emerging right now most closely mirrors the kind of breakthrough that might have terrified the Anunnaki controllers 6,000 years ago? Are we, perhaps unwittingly, rebuilding the very key that could unlock the dungeon door right under the watchful eye of that dark satellite?